American planes dropped millions of leaflets over German lines, and the messages inside these simple pieces of paper changed everything for some soldiers in ways no bullet or bomb ever could. One German officer read his leaflet 3 times in the fading daylight, his hands trembling slightly as the words sank deeper with each reading, before making a shocking decision that his entire exhausted unit would soon follow without hesitation. What these papers revealed wasn't just propaganda designed to break spirits or spread lies. It was real information, hard truth their own leaders desperately tried to hide from them at all costs. And when that truth finally reached them through these floating messages from the sky, thousands of German soldiers scattered across frozen battlefields realized with crushing certainty they'd been fighting for a cause already lost, a war already decided. But one particular message, one specific set of words, hit harder than all the rest combined, cutting through years of conditioning and orders to reach something deeper, something profoundly human. American planes flew silently over German positions every single night, appearing like dark shadows against the star-filled sky. They weren't dropping deadly weapons or explosive bombs that would tear through earth and flesh. They were dropping paper, millions upon millions of small leaflets that floated down slowly like snow in winter, covering muddy trenches and earthen foxholes where cold, exhausted German soldiers waited in the bitter darkness, wondering when this would all finally end. These weren't just any random papers thrown carelessly from the sky. Each one carried a carefully crafted message, words chosen specifically to reach the hearts and minds of men who had been fighting for far too long. One young German soldier named Hans, barely 20 years old with dirt under his fingernails and fear in his eyes, picked up a leaflet near his post somewhere in occupied France. He read it quickly at first, glancing nervously over his shoulder to make sure no officer was watching, then carefully hid it deep in his jacket pocket, where it pressed against his chest like a secret. His hands were shaking noticeably, not from the cold but from what he'd just read. The message inside told him something his commanding officers never mentioned in their speeches, something about what was really happening back home in Germany, in the cities and towns he remembered from childhood. Within just a few days, Hans would make a choice that could end his life or save it, a decision that terrified him. But first, he needed to know if the leaflet was actually telling the truth, if these words from the enemy could somehow be trusted. Because if it was true, if even half of what that paper said was accurate, then everything he believed about this conflict, everything he'd been told since the beginning, was completely wrong. And he wasn't the only one lying awake at night asking these dangerous questions. The American military called these papers propaganda leaflets in official reports and planning documents, but they served a purpose far different from simple propaganda that just shouted empty slogans. Each leaflet was carefully designed by teams of experts, psychologists and intelligence officers who had studied for months what German soldiers cared about most deeply in their hearts, what kept them awake during long, lonely night watches, their families waiting anxiously at home, their own safety in an increasingly dangerous war, their uncertain future after the conflict finally ended, if they even survived to see that day. The messages were kept deliberately simple, written in short, clear sentences that were easy to read even in poor light, even by exhausted men with only basic education. Some leaflets showed detailed maps of Allied advances, black arrows pushing deeper into territory that German radio insisted was still firmly held. Others included actual photographs, real images that German newspapers never printed, never allowed their citizens to see. Many contained one powerful, simple promise that echoed in soldiers' minds long after they'd read the words: "You will be treated fairly, with dignity and respect. If you choose to stop fighting right now." German commanders knew all about these leaflets dropping from the night sky. They ordered soldiers repeatedly not to read them, not to touch them, not to even look at them. Anyone caught with a leaflet hidden in their possession could face serious punishment, everything from loss of rations to something much worse. Some desperate officers even threatened their own exhausted men, insisting loudly that the papers contained nothing but lies designed specifically to make them weak and cowardly. But curiosity is a powerful thing, perhaps one of the most powerful forces in human nature. And when you're cold to the bone, tired beyond measure, and so very far from home, even a small piece of paper with forbidden words can plant a tiny seed of doubt that grows steadily in the darkness. A German sergeant named Friedrich, 32 years old with a wife and 2 young children he hadn't seen in over a year, found a leaflet in March of 1944. He was stationed near the brutal Italian front where men died daily in meaningless small battles. The leaflet showed a stark black-and-white photograph of a destroyed German city, buildings reduced to hollow shells and rubble-filled streets. The caption beneath the image read simply, "Directly. While you fight here, far from home, your city faces total destruction from the air." Friedrich stared at the image for a long time, his breath catching in his throat. His family lived in Hamburg, a city he'd known his entire life. He hadn't heard from them in months, despite writing letters that seemed to disappear into nothing. That night he couldn't sleep at all, lying in his cold bunk staring at the wooden ceiling. He kept thinking about the photograph, about those destroyed buildings. Was his city, his neighborhood, his street really hit that badly by Allied bombers? Were his wife and children safe, or were they among the casualties he'd never been told about? His commanding officer told them repeatedly that Germany was winning this war, that victory was inevitable and close. But this leaflet showed something completely different. Something that looked like widespread devastation that specifically affected innocent civilian areas far from any battlefield. Friedrich made a quiet decision that night, one that would change everything. He would keep the leaflet hidden carefully. He started actively collecting more whenever they fell, reading each one by dim candlelight. Each leaflet told him small bits of crucial information his own leaders never shared, information they actively hid. And slowly, carefully, like pieces of a terrible puzzle, a bigger picture began forming clearly in his mind, one that would fundamentally change everything he thought he knew about this conflict and his place in it. Not every German soldier believed the leaflets, of course. Many threw them away immediately without reading a single word, dismissing them as obvious enemy tricks. Some burned them in small fires during freezing nights just to stay warm for a few extra minutes. Others laughed bitterly at the messages, calling them weak, pathetic attempts to break the legendary German spirit they'd been told was unbreakable. But there was one specific type of leaflet that almost nobody threw away carelessly, one that soldiers folded carefully and hid in their deepest pockets. The Safe Conduct Pass. These special leaflets looked noticeably different from all the others dropping from the sky. They were printed on thicker, more durable paper and included official-looking stamps and seals that seemed somehow legitimate. The message printed on them was crystal clear, impossible to misunderstand. The soldier carrying this pass will be treated with respect and dignity. He will receive proper food, necessary medical care, and guaranteed safety. He will not be harmed. Thousands of German soldiers across multiple fronts kept these passes hidden away carefully. They didn't plan to use them right away, didn't whisper about them openly. But having one tucked away felt like insurance, like a backup plan if things got even worse than they already were. And things were definitely getting worse with each passing week. Allied forces were pushing forward relentlessly on every front. German supply lines that once seemed so organized were breaking down completely. Food became increasingly scarce, sometimes non-existent. Medicine ran out entirely. The safe conduct passes hidden in soldiers' pockets suddenly seemed less like enemy propaganda and more like a very real option for survival. In the final desperate months of the conflict, something completely unexpected happened that shocked military commanders on both sides. German soldiers started surrendering willingly with leaflets clutched in their hands, holding them up like white flags. Not just one or two isolated soldiers making panicked individual choices. Entire groups, whole squads. Some units even discussed the leaflets openly among themselves in low voices, carefully debating whether the promises printed on them were actually real or just clever lies. One young corporal later admitted during his interview, "We talked about those papers more than we talked about fighting anymore. They became more important than orders. The numbers tell a story that words alone cannot fully capture." Allied forces reported officially that many German soldiers who chose to stop fighting, who walked forward with their hands raised, carried the safe conduct passes. Some had multiple leaflets folded carefully in their pockets, collected over weeks or months. These weren't desperate men making rushed, panicked choices in the heat of battle. They were soldiers who had thought carefully, seriously about their options and their futures. One German officer admitted something particularly interesting after being captured and questioned. "The leaflets didn't convince me immediately," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "But they made me start questioning everything I'd been told. And once you start questioning, once that seed is planted, it's incredibly hard to stop." His honest words revealed something profoundly important about how these simple papers actually worked on the human mind. They didn't need to convince someone all at once with overwhelming arguments. They just needed to plant enough doubt, enough questions to start a slow internal process that grew stronger over time. The most effective leaflets weren't about complex politics or abstract ideology that soldiers couldn't relate to. They were deeply personal, speaking directly to individual fears and hopes. One famous leaflet that became legendary showed a German soldier sitting completely alone in a destroyed trench, head in his hands, clearly thinking about something far away. The caption asked one simple, devastating question: "What are you really fighting for now?" That simple question, just 8 words, hit harder than any complex argument or lengthy explanation ever could. Another widely distributed leaflet listed German cities hit hard by Allied air raids. The list was long, detailed, and horrifyingly accurate. Many soldiers recognized their own hometowns on that printed list, places where they'd grown up, where their families still lived. Seeing those familiar names printed on Allied paper, knowing the enemy knew exactly what was happening to their homes, made the desperate situation feel real in a way that confident orders from distant commanders never did. But there was one particular message that became absolutely legendary among soldiers on both sides of the conflict. It wasn't threatening or mocking. It didn't insult German soldiers or question their courage. It simply said with quiet power, "The conflict is ending. You can choose how your story ends." Those 2 short sentences appeared on millions of leaflets dropped during the final brutal year. And according to extensive post-conflict interviews with thousands of former soldiers, those specific words stuck with men long after they'd read them, echoing in their minds during quiet moments. Simple language, direct message, maximum impact. After the conflict finally ended and soldiers returned home, researchers interviewed thousands of former German soldiers, asking them detailed questions about their experiences. They asked one specific question about the leaflets: "Did they actually influence your decision to stop fighting?" The answers were surprising and more nuanced than anyone expected. Most soldiers said honestly that the leaflets alone didn't make them stop fighting immediately. But combined with everything else they were experiencing, poor conditions, dwindling supplies, terrible news from home, constant defeats, the leaflets became the final piece that helped them make a choice they'd been unable to make before. One former soldier explained it clearly and simply. "The leaflet gave me permission to admit what I already knew deep down. We weren't going to prevail, we'd already lost. And staying meant either getting killed myself or watching my friends face the same fate. The leaflet let me act on what I already felt." His words captured perfectly what thousands felt, but couldn't say openly to each other. The leaflets worked because they spoke to a truth that German propaganda tried desperately to hide. They offered a way out that didn't require betraying personal values or feeling like a coward. And most importantly, They promised something every exhausted soldier wanted more than anything: a chance to survive, a chance to return home. The American Leaflet campaign dropped over 6 billion papers during the conflict. That's not an exaggeration or estimate. 6 billion actual pieces of paper, designed specifically to save lives by ending fighting without additional combat. Military historians still debate seriously how many German soldiers were directly influenced by these messages. The exact number is impossible to know with certainty, but we do know this beyond any doubt. Allied commanders considered the Leaflet program highly successful, based on measurable results. It cost relatively little compared to traditional combat operations that required massive resources, and it achieved concrete results that saved countless lives on both sides of the conflict. Those simple papers floating down from dark night skies carried something far more powerful than high explosives or bullets. They carried truth, hope, and choice. For thousands of German soldiers standing in cold trenches reading by dim flashlight, those leaflets represented a real path forward when everything else seemed completely lost. And sometimes that's all it takes to change a life: a small piece of paper offering a different ending to an impossible situation.